this is something I saw. I saw a little discussion on Twitter about, and this is on the topic of what I'm going to call nostalgic content. So, what is nostalgic content? Well, it's we've dabbled in it a little bit here ourselves. We did a couple classic pay per view reviews. Um, really, just any content that focuses on the past. So, the question here is essentially about nostalgic MMA content versus nostalgic WWE content.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why there's that distinction made is nostalgic WWE content is like a gold mine on YouTube. It's
Mm-hmm.
I've actually I watch a lot of it myself, even though I don't even watch wrestling anymore. I always love watching channels like Wrestling with Regret. There's some others before that, but that's really all I follow at this point. And they post a lot of like classic pay-per-view reviews basically for wrestling shows. And I love watching it because that's the era that I really consumed the product.
Yeah.
But nostalgic MMA content is very hard to come by on YouTube. And
It's true.
really, when you do see it, it doesn't tend to do that well. There's even one of the leading, I guess, voices in this discussion on Twitter was someone who has their own podcast. I believe it's called Behind the Hexagon or Inside the Hexagon. It's a podcast dedicated to Strike Force. Going. So he does a lot of interviews with some of the bigger names of Strike Force, going maybe through their resume, or he'll focus on a single card, for Strike Force and break down the fights on there. A lot of really cool podcasts. I've listened to quite a bit of it. So the question, Dominic, nostalgic MMA content does not get near the kind of response that nostalgic WWE content does. But why is that?
To me, when I think about it, it's got to be that entertainment factor, right? It's that storyline factor. In the WWE, there were the characters essentially playing these roles, and then they would intertwine with other characters. It would build rivalries. It would build storylines that would go days, weeks, months, even a full year. It would take. You would build up, and then at WrestleMania, the match occurs, or at the Royal Rumble, the return happens of this fighter. So it's got to be that for me. Whereas MMA is just. It's the real life fight game, right? It's these guys that are going to fight 2, 3, 4 times a year, and they don't really. Yes, you get like your build-ups to pay-per-views with the countdowns and whatnot, but there's not that nostalgic piece, I guess, that really tugs at your heart and gets you like fully indulged. Obviously, we're indulged in all things MMA because we love it and we do a podcast and stuff, but we still don't feel the way we did about the old school WWE days. And I'm sure there's still kids that view the WWE as we did when we were young in today's generation. So it is that factor to me of that entertainment piece, the storylines, the characters, and you could just attach yourself to so many different things. And really, week in and week out, you could watch these stories take place. Whereas if you have like a fighter, they're only going to fight. If you have a favorite fighter, I should say, they're only going to be on the screen, 2, 3 times a year. But if you're watching WWE and you love Jeff Hardy like me and Noah, or you love Triple H, The Rock, so on and so forth, you'd see him 2 times a week for 50 weeks out of the year. So I think that's where it comes down to why it just still is so prominent today. Before we started recording, I told Noah I was on Peacock last night because they have a huge WWE catalog now, and I was watching the best of The Rock, and it's showing some of his best moments, some of his best matches. So just little things like that, and remembering where I was at the time, what did I think then versus how I view it now as an adult. And that's why it kind of takes the cake for me over the MMA content from the past.
You know what? I think that's a good answer, and I think there's even more to it. It's a lot of this is, you're right. It's almost like the way you were kind of describing it. It's almost kind of inevitable because WWE, like, it's just so much different because you can you build up the people you want to build up, and it's easier to create stars in a promotion where it's scripted than when it's all reality, mano a mano, right?
Right.
So, you've seen these careers like The Undertaker just retired last year. The guy had been wrestling for 30 years.
Crazy.
And at the end, he didn't look like the big bad Undertaker anymore. He was a bit more older. He had more, years on his belt. But when he would come back and he would wrestle a guy like AJ Styles or someone who's like very fit, very in shape, very built, and he would beat their ass because he's the Undertaker. That's what he does. It's that character aspect. But I actually think there's an aspect to this of let's compare to UFC versus WWE. You know, have you ever noticed that Dana White, and this is really his job as a fight promoter, he always focuses on the present.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Kamaru Usman, after his win against Colby Covington last month, was being crowned by Dana as the best welterweight of all time.
Yeah.
But people got upset about that. But you have to understand from Dana's perspective, there's no reason for him to say otherwise.
Right.
There is no value for him to say that George St. Pierre or Matt Hughes or whoever is the best welterweight of all time because they aren't making the company money anymore.
Yep, that's true.
So you have these guys like Kamaru Usman who are on this great run, and of course he should back that champion. You know, that's the guy that he's promoting, he's building up right now. In the WWE, what's always been interesting, if you go and watch, they do a great job with their nostalgic content. But if you ask someone who's really into wrestling, I bet they would tell you that like WWE specifically, they're almost too much into the nostalgic content to where they struggle to build up guys now.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the reverse effect. It's like MMA struggles to really have any sort of remembrance of the past and that kind of nostalgic feeling. But WWE almost struggles to focus on the present.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I because I have Peacock, I'll see ad placements for upcoming WWE cards, and they'll have a headlining spot for Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why is Goldberg still wrestling? That guy's almost 60 years old.
Yeah.
You know, Brock Lesnar's still hanging around. You know, you got these guys. The Undertaker will still come back for a one-off here and there. Like, it's just, but they're doing this and they're having him beat these guys that are very old or older, I should say, beating, you know, these young up-and-comers, if you want to call them that. In MMA, that doesn't happen. You know,
right.
Anderson Silva gets put up against Uriah Hall. If it was WWE, Anderson Silva probably wins.
Right.
But instead, real life, Uriah Hall wins because he's the younger,
better fighter.
At this point. So that's really the root of the issue, is that one gets to kind of pick and choose how they want people to be perceived. I mean, there is an aspect of like the fans have to get behind someone, but I'm just saying your career, you could be the best wrestler in the world because someone decided you were.
Yeah. Yeah.
MMA doesn't work that way.
It's true.
So it's I personally love nostalgic MMA content when I see it. I do really enjoy looking back on some of those old pay-per-views. You know, I've really been digging into Pride recently. I plan on going over to Strikeforce after that, WEC. I do have I'm a nostalgic person. That's just kind of how I roll. And a lot of that comes from when I grew up, WWE. If you watch WrestleManias, the beginning, the hype package at the beginning, it's always like Hulk Hogan slamming Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. Dominic, me and you never watched WrestleMania 3 because that was 1987. But we remember that moment because you see it time and time again.
Yep.
Even some of our fondest wrestling memories, I can tell you probably we didn't even see live. And we don't realize
That's true.
it. Like the Attitude Era, we were like 3 years old. When the Attitude Era was going on. You know, that's what we remember fondly. We weren't even there.
Yeah, we were just running around in our diapers and it was on the TV, but we weren't like present in the moment, you know?
So it was like later we kind of would go back and watch it. And then we almost like, we became so invested in that time period. We almost convinced ourselves that we were there.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of crazy. I mean, it's both sides are doing great things, but on the reverse, like they probably should focus a little more on the other side, especially like WWE should focus on its present day stars.
Yeah.
Like UFC probably should focus a little bit more on its nostalgic content. You know,
it's like we're looking for the middle ground here.
Yeah. You know, I think there's some great Fight Pass has that show I really like.
Fight lore.
Yes, Fight Lore I think is a great show that they kind of have just. I mean, it's still putting out good episodes, but like God, I love like the Joe Riggs and Nick Diaz hospital fight. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just these weird stories. You know, the Bruce Buffer story where it's like him and Michael Buffer didn't know each other for basically 20 plus years, and then they find out they're brothers, and now they're both two of the biggest. What would you call them?
Personalities and combat
announcers.
Sport. Yeah,
ring announcers in the world. All these stories are great. I wish the UFC would do more stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree.